So in this video, I'm going to talk about color as a design tool. We've already talked about coloring specific elements such as our paragraph or our headings, but we're also going to talk about how you can add color for your background, not just the background of the page, but actually the background to those paragraphs and to the headings. So the way CSS treats each HTML element, such as a paragraph or a heading, is as if it appears in a box. And down here I have an example. And if we set the background property to one of our headings, for example, you're going to see how that box appears. So here's an example. I have my H1 and I've set a background color, and I haven't done anything else. This is from my cookies, the recipe website that you have as homework. And you can see how actually this entire space here is part of the box that is assigned to my H1 tag. So if I set a background color to my H1 tag, this is the result that I'm going to get. So I'm going to talk about the different ways that you can specify color value. There are four main ways. The first way is the predefined color. Just those are color names that we've grown up with, like yellow, white, gray. The second is the hexadecimal code, and that is what we've been doing so far. And it typically looks like this. The third are RGB values, and those I'll talk about that. And the fourth is the HSL value. I'll go over each one of these. They all have kind of their advantages. If you want to use just colored names, like in this first example, where you just want to put in color, background color, gray, for example. If you want to do that, there are 17 standard names, but about 147 total names that are accepted. So in a way, you're kind of limited because you need to make sure that the name that you have, that you've listed, you're using one of those standard names. So I really recommend this for just the most standard colors, such as black and white, maybe gray, yellow, primary colors. So if you want to use this, because it's really fast, it's faster than having to click on the code, click on the color picker, and to pick out a color. So you would just use it by typing in color, colon, and then put in the name. So here, for example, I set my background color of my entire page to be black. My H1s would have the text color, would be maroon. My H2s would have the text color of olive. And continuing on, because I haven't closed it yet, my H2 also has a background color of gray, if you can visualize that, and a border. We haven't talked about borders yet, but we will. It has just a bottom border, which basically looks like an underline color of teal. So if you want to use the color names, this is exactly how you'd go ahead and do it. The other way of inputting color that's quite common is to use the RGB color mode. And this is how our computers see color. Our computers see color on the monitor by combining three lights of color: red, green, and blue. So R, G, and B. Each one of these has from 0 to 255 of color. We think of 255 as being the color at full blast. The closer the three of the values get to 255, we're going to get closer to white. If I have my R is at 255, my G is at 255, and my B is at 255, I would get white. So here's kind of an example of sort of a nice lavender. My R, for my red, is not quite at 255, but it's pretty high. So it's a 200. And then my other values, my green value is a little bit lower, but it's pretty high. And then my blue value is almost at 255. So that's how you can think of this as just a different way of mixing paints. And that end result would be sort of this lavender color here. If you're using a color picker, this is an example of a color picker in Photoshop. You have kind of the same thing in Dreamweaver here. Notice here I've picked a red. This is a bright red. And if we look at the RGB values, you can see that my R value is almost 255. So that's like full blast. And I have just a little bit of green and blue in this color here. And if I now have a color that's a little more muted, so just I'll go back, that was my bright red, to now it's still in the red hues, but it's much more muted. Let's look at the difference. My greens and my blues are now higher. So my red has stayed about the same, but green and blues have increased. They're getting closer to 255. So remember, if all three values are 255, it equals white. If you have one value that's close to 255 and the other ones are getting close to 255 but not exactly, It's basically going to give you that color, the red or whichever one you have, but at a very sort of washed out, lighter tone. Notice that while we're here, in any color picker, I also have down here, this is my hexadecimal number. So these are the numbers that we've been inputting so far in Dreamweaver through the color picker. And most color pickers show you the 3 different ways to be able to get your colors. If you wanted to use RGB on your pages, and I would like you really to experiment with using all of these different ways of inputting color. So it's just a slightly different syntax. Right after color and the colon, you're going to put RGB, and then you put the 3 values in parentheses. So this would be that example of a very bright red. So this is my R, this is my G for green, and this is my B for blue. And they're in parentheses. So that's the way the syntax looks. One very nice reason for using RGB is because it allows you to take a 4th value, which is the alpha value. Alpha is transparency. So I can have a 4th value that is on a scale of 0 to 1, where 1 is completely opaque. That's just the way it looks normally. 0 is 100% transparent, so I wouldn't even see it. So here's an example of, I've set background color, and now you have to change the syntax a little bit. I put RGBA for alpha, and then I put in 4 values. My first one is red, second one is green, third one is blue, and the 4th one is opacity. So in this example it's kind of like a cyan color at 100% opacity, but in the second example I've lowered the opacity to 0.25. So you can see it stays within the same hue, but basically it's becoming more transparent. So I just need to make sure I add the A to the RGB at the end of it. So this is going to be useful, when you're working with certain color backgrounds, or maybe things are overlapping and you wanted to get a transparency effect. So the hexadecimal codes, the only thing I'm going to talk about, because this is just the kind of the default setting that we have, is I just wanted to point out, so these numbers, when you get them, use the color picker in Dreamweaver. The first 2 are for the reds, the second 2 are for the greens, and the third ones are for the blues. So at this point, why don't I just quickly jump over to Dreamweaver, and we can take a quick look at setting up some of these colors here. So, for example, right here, you have this is the example I was using in the PowerPoint, the background color, and this one is using the HSLA, which I haven't covered yet. So let's go backwards, and if I wanted to just use, let's say, white, I wanted to just simply say white. That was our first example of how we could use it, using just a color name, and then you can see how it appears white here. But I don't have the option of transparency, so that's one reason to not use it. I could use the RGB, and I get the color picker, and I could click into here, and I move it around, and if I'm on this value here, the RGB, if I'm on that button, it's going to give me the RGBA, so it automatically assumes I want to use transparency or the alpha, and when I click outside, it's going to input those numbers for me, and I just add my semicolon at the end, and here I get that. And then let's just look at that example of, instead of at 1%, which is completely opaque, I'll put 0.25, and we can see how now that color is still there, but it's become much more transparent. And then the third one is simply using the hexadecimal. So I'm going to right click to get up that color picker again, Code Hint Tools, Color Picker, and I'm going to get this, and now it's back on its default of hexadecimal, and I can pick a different color here, and you can see how it's giving me the number now, just as I was showing in my PowerPoint, of hexadecimal. And whoops, I don't know where that just went in the wrong spot, sorry about that. Let's try that again. Bigger, just grab a number. Well, it keeps moving my mouse, so I'm going to have to take this number and just cut it out. I don't know why it's doing that, but that's okay. And input it again. So and something is telling me here that it's not right. When I see that I'm getting these colors here, things don't look right. So what can I see that looks wrong? Well, that shouldn't be a semicolon there. and that should be an open curly bracket. And I'm not quite sure exactly what my mouse did, how it moved things around, but now anyway you can see. So here's the example with the hexadecimal numbers going on. Okay, so I'm just going to finish up with the last type, which is the HSL, the hue, saturation, and lightness. It's going to seem a little bit complicated, I think, at first, but then as soon as I show you an example, it should make sense. So first thing you do is you find the hue, which is based on a circle. And I'll show you in the next slide the 360 degrees, with the colors are spread in a circle with red at the top. So we're going to come up with a degree number like 26 or 225. The second value we're going to put in is saturation, which is expressed from 0 to 100. The third is lightness, which is also expressed as a percent from 0 to 100. You can also take a fourth value, which is the alpha value. Sorry, I should have put this back up. There we go. And here's an example. So we have background color at 0, 100%, 100%, and a slight amount of transparency. So the reason that people like this is because once you find the hue that you like, such as in this example, 190 gives this kind of blue, I can just change one of these other values to get variants of the same color. So for example, if I just wanted to increase the saturation, so you can see the difference between this one at this kind of cyan, but now I've taken that same hue of cyan and I've just made it brighter. And I could have done the same thing with keep the same hue, keep the same saturation, but change it, make it lighter or darker, or change the opacity, the fourth value over here. Oh, okay. All right, so that's where I'm going to end this video, and I'd really like you to go ahead and explore working. Just go, even if it's just on a background color of your page or background, try adding the background color element to one of your H1 tags. Just open up any kind of page and do it. And try going through adding RGB, RGBA, the HSL, the HSLA, and in addition also just the ones that are by names. And I'll add some additional links on Blackboard from the W3 school, so you can have some of this as text information as well.